Welcome back, everybody. We're super excited today. It's the day we get to start working on my airplane.
Our airplane.
Our airplane. And so we're going to get started momentarily. Coming right up. All right, everybody, welcome back. We are in the Kitfox build shop, and today we are very excited to actually be turning wrenches and getting started on the airplane.
Actually building.
Actually building.
Yeah.
So excited that I'm not sure I can trust myself, so we've invited adult supervision. And ladies and gentlemen, he needs no introduction, John McBean. Kitfox aficionado, Kitfox everything. Too much?
It's okay.
Too much? Okay. So, John, people have the manual in front of them. Where would you have them start?
Well, first, guys, I'm really excited about you getting started on your airplane. I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Thank you.
As far as the manual is concerned, we've spent a lot of time and a lot of effort on engineering the airplane. Well, we've spent just about as much time developing the builder's manual to help people put the project together. Without getting too carried away, there's no specific right way of doing it. There's several different ways of doing it. Everybody's going to have a different take on how they do their inventory, how they actually build the airplane. There's nothing wrong with starting at the beginning and working your way from the front to the back. You can bounce around within the manual. You might come up with something completely different, or decide that you want to put the entire airplane together, have the engine running, have it out in the taxiway or out in the ramp, engine running with absolutely zero fabric or paint on it, and then come back and take it all apart and start fabric covering again. I'm going to kind of lean you away from doing everything up front and then coming back and doing all the fabric covering, because the fabric covering, although is enjoyable, it's almost therapeutic in some cases. It also is time consuming, so it takes a little bit of time, a little bit of effort. It's very easy to do, but it takes time to do it, and if you have everything covering and nothing to break up that monotony, you're covering for a long, long time.
What was your experience with that?
Yes, it was my experience
Covering
with that.
for a long time.
And we had a mission, so we actually planned it that way, and then went into paint right after that, and we did an awful lot of work in fabric and paint at the same time. It was a little tiring because there was nothing that breaks that up. Every now and again, you want to just take a pause, maybe come back and put an assembly together or do something else. Well, our tail covers, the horizontal tail was all covered, the elevators were covered, the rudders were covered, the cowlings were done, so everything was either ready for paint or ready to be covered, and there's no way to do one and the other. You almost have to do one prior to the other.
Yeah.
So it was a little bit overwhelming, and I won't even say overwhelming. It was trying to eat the elephant in one bite and doing everything in one thing and not breaking it up.
One task just seemed to be endless.
Yeah, it went on for a long time. The one thing I will recommend is when you get your manual, before you get started, the first thing you're going to do is your inventory, obviously. And when you get done with your inventory, you'll come back, go through the manual, and you might even be more excited than that and just want to review the manual, and that's fine too. You go through the manual, start from the beginning, and focus on the builder's tips. The builder's tips has a lot of information in there, from torque specifications to safety wiring. There's symbology in there that will be played out throughout the manual, and if you don't know what that symbology means in the diagram later, guys, we got to do more than look at pictures. You got to read. Look at the diagrams. There's also
both sides of the page.
Both sides of the page. There's also a section in there where you'll have a diagram, for example, and a parts list on that diagram that is part of that assembly. And then there will be symbology there that is called out in the builder's tips for the safety wire or Loctite. And you might not have that Loctite. You may have to go get that Loctite. There's a lot of little things where you have to ream a component or a torque spec.
Yep.
If it's not specified in the component to torque it to a certain value, take that size bolt, go to the torque specifications in the builder's tip section, and go through that.
Revert to a standard torque at that point.
Revert to a standard torque, yep. And in the builder's tips, or in that section, there is a series of checklists that have been developed by Brandon, actually, from building the airplanes here in the kind of the sequence that we like to follow. And that sequence works out really well because it will have you bouncing around with inside the manual to one component that might be done in the wing section or in the final assembly section will be moved forward to the fuselage section, somewhere along those lines, so that you don't have to redo it. You can put it in, leave it in, you don't have to worry about it again.
Easier done before cover.
Easier done before cover. So there's a lot of that, and I emphasize, review the manual. Go through it. Don't try to build the airplane from the manual, but get a big picture of what's going on. You know, when you're planning a vacation, you know where you're going, and you try to plan stops along the way.
Right.
Kind of the same process. Get a big picture where
Perfect
you're going.
analogy.
You know where you're going. Start breaking it down into small pieces. Or as we like to say, don't try to eat the elephant in one bite. So, but I'm excited for you guys, and I think you guys are going to be starting on the horizontal tail section. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
we'll just stick around and see what we do.
Perfect.
fun.
All right.
Perfect. Well, we'll get started. Stick around. This segment will actually be broken out into a few different videos where we'll discuss the the basics of reaming. We'll be working with plywood. We'll be varnishing plywood, and we're going to take these horizontal and elevator all the way through covering.
Yeah, that's going to give a lot of tips in a small section so that you'll get a little hint of everything that you can apply to other parts of the build as well.
Perfect. All right, let's get started. All right, step number one in the manual is to go ahead and ream all the holes and bushings and pass-throughs and everything in the horizontal and the elevator and the fuselage where we're going to be passing through. So one thing that I would recommend actually is while you've got the reamers out is to go ahead and ream everything in the fuselage. Ream all your parts, ream everywhere that you're going to be passing hardware through. Prior to coming to Kitfox Aircraft, I'd never heard of a reamer. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what it did.
Brandon?
Go ahead.
So
We have a question down in front.
why would you ream instead of drill? Just run a drill through
Okay.
there.
Completely valid question. So for our first-time builders or somebody that may not know, when you drill a hole, a lot of times you'll get a little spiral cut inside of that hole. A reamer leaves a better finish inside that hole, and it's going to true the size of anything that you're going to be passing hardware into so that you have a good net fit.
Okay.
You use the reamer for clearing out powder coat. In these cases where we powder coat the airplane parts and send them to you, you're going to need to clean the powder coat out. We do that with a reamer.
Okay.
In some cases, if the hole was severely undersized, you actually want to use a drill first, then pass a reamer through to give you that finish that you're looking for and that final size. Okay. There's a few rules pertaining to reaming. You should never run a reamer backwards
Okay.
in a bushing because it will dull the flutes on the reamer itself. Whenever possible, try and pull the reamer through the bushing rather than trying to push it through. Whenever we push through and we're starting with the cutting surfaces of the reamer, you can be just a degree or two off. You'll end up augering that hole out and making it all wonky. Are the kids still using
I don't
wonky?
know.
Is that still a term?
Wonky, it's okay.
But it kind of augers out that hole and then kind of defeats the purpose of using a precise reamer in that case. So be real careful. There's going to be times where you just have to push it through. Just make sure it's going in straight. Make sure you take it slow. And always use a cutting lubricant. So there's some cutting fluids out there.
Okay.
In this case, we have a wax that stays on the cutting flutes. You can use this with drills or taps or reamers. So you just put a little of that on there. It helps lubricate, keep it cool, so that things aren't heating up as you're reaming. So always recommend those. And then lastly, we're going to talk about a little bit of setup we have here with different reamers. So you'll find lots of different sizes. If you've got our builder's toolkit,
Yep.
you'll actually have reamers in there that are right sizes for all the different things
Locations that
you're
you're
going to
gonna ream.
Yeah. So if you want, you can take those and attach them. If you have the means and ability, you can attach them. You know, here's our reamer section right at the very end here. And we've attached this to a steel rod.
By attached, you mean weld.
Weld, yes. Hot glue does not work, trust me. But you take this, and that would allow us to pass this through all of the tabs on one side of the elevator, making that really, really easy to just feed that through from the end, ream all the holes, and we're done. Same thing with the larger one we have here. Not quite as long, we didn't need it to be, but you know, little larger size rod. It just has to be undersized of the actual finish reaming size so that you can pass it through. Okay, if you don't have that option, a couple things you can do. In this case, we've actually welded a universal joint from a socket set onto the end of the reamer, and that allows us to chuck in a drill a 1/4 inch drive, and then use that through different angles to keep the drill away from the tubing, and then gives us just a little more movement. It makes it happen just a little faster.
Some flexibility on
Flexibility. Always be careful when withdrawing the reamer, because it'll start to do crazy things. Okay? All right, lastly, probably the simplest solution is to take a reamer and grind a square on the end of it. Okay? And what that's going to allow us to do, if you're really, really good with a grinder, you can actually make that fit inside of a socket, and then you could use that same principle with a socket drive. The other thing you can do is put it into the hole and start reaming it using, or start rotating it with a set of vice grips or a crescent wrench, adjustable wrench, and use it that way. So a few different options of things to make it work. You will find that with these bushings on the hinge of the horizontal and elevator, you're not going to get a drill chucked with a reamer that close to the tubing. It interferes. So you got to be creative in one of those ways in order to make that happen. So
Cool.
Any other questions?
No, let's do it.
All right. One thing I failed to mention is sometimes you got to make it work. What do I mean by that? So some people may have heard John say, you know, we're going to hammer to fit, paint to match, and sometimes that's kind of how it is. You may find that a piece of hardware, a certain bolt size, maybe an AN3 something, but it may be slightly oversized. And so a standard 1875 reamer isn't going to let that AN3 bolt go through. So you may want to source a bigger reamer, so you could jump up just a little bit. Instead of a 1875, you go 188 maybe, and that would open that up. Sometimes just running the drill at a faster speed is going to open that hole up a little bit, just from a tolerance level of that drill. So, you know, kind of make it work. Typically, we're going to run the reamer at a slower speed right off the bat. They're not meant to go high speed. So, in this case, I'm going to start with just a little bit of lube. Okay, and I'm just putting a little bit. Like I said, I want to pull the reamer through this hole, and so I'm just putting a little bit at what will be the leading side of the cutter, which is actually the shank side. Okay, so we're going to. Okay, so right off the bat, the very first hole I go to ream, we're loaded with powder coat. This won't go in backwards. The hole with the powder coat in there is too small to get the shank in. So I've got a couple of choices here. I can re-chuck this drill, or excuse me, I can chuck the reamer, and I can drive it in, and that would work. But it's a little sketchy, and it's a little scary, okay? So instead, let's grab a drill that's slightly undersized, okay? And I'm going to run that in real slow. And see, it's just pulling out powder coat. Okay, that makes me happy because I just want to clear the powder coat. I don't want to resize the hole. Okay, now that perfectly goes in there. Okay, so now I can chuck that in place. I'm going to turn my drill down to slow, and we're going to go backwards through the ream. You can hear it working. You can hear it true in that size. That's exactly what we want to see. Okay? So if I find later that the bolt won't pass through, I may choose to come in and run that just a little faster. At that point, let it kind of work, and it may open that hole up just enough to where I can pass that through easily. Okay? On to the next. Let me demonstrate our long reamer. So in this case, I don't have a choice because we're using a long reamer. I don't have a choice but to go in straight. You feel like one of those clowns with one of the really long guns. But anyway. Okay, so we're just going to go nice and slow. Take real easy. Okay, and I'm kind of, sighting with this tube to make sure I stay true and straight. Okay, so through the first set of tabs. Don't run it, because what will happen is this will start to just get crazy. Wonky, did I already say wonky? Did I use wonky already? Okay, so now I'm just putting the reamer at the very edge of the hole. Then I'm going to run it, give it a little pressure, let it go through both of those. Okay. Guide it through the last set. And there we go. Okay, for the last one, let's demonstrate the universal socket method. Okay. So as I come in here, this now allows me to get the drill away from the tube. Okay. If I was coming in from this side, you can see how important that would be. Okay, I want to be able to hit the drill at a little bit of an angle. So I'm going to guide this with one hand. Okay, let the reamer do the work, take time. Okay. I typically will pass the reamer through the entire length of the flute. All right, so this front tab is another example where having the reamer on the universal joint goes real easy to pass this through. Again, going in the full length of the reaming flute. Okay, there we go. We're in business. Young lady, would you like a chance at this?
It's our airplane.
All right, give it a go. I'll hold the elevator for you.
Yeah, okay.
This one should be easy because I already reamed that particular one with,
The first one?
yeah, with the universal joint. So that's going to go straight through, no problem. Okay. There you go. You're lined up on there, give a little power. Good. So once you're to this point, it's just going to kind of align itself with that second tab. So let it just do its thing. The only place you need to really worry about alignment is this distance between
the long
tabs.
distance.
Yeah, exactly. Down here, it's going to want to get wonky all on its own. I think I'm stuck on wonky today.
It's a wonky kind of day. Do I need to run it in between?
Not as long as it's moving. Cool. Baby, you're building an airplane.
Woohoo!
Good job. We'll continue reaming and check back with you shortly. All right, so that about covers all the reaming for the horizontal and the elevator. While I've got the 3/16 reamer, let's focus on some of the key points of the fuselage. The horizontal will actually mount right here. So we'll get a little lube on our little wax. And I put it at the base of the flutes in order to keep that area cool and lubricated. So we're going to start right here where the horizontal mates up to the fuselage, and this is actually our pivot point for our trim, trimmable stabilizer. All right, we're going to let Heather do a little practice with reaming, and we're going to make a pro out of her by the time this is all said and done. So, just like we talked about before, we're going to draw the reamer through these holes, and which means you got to pass it through first, then tighten down your chuck. Once it's tight, then you can draw it down through, just making sure that it's going smoothly and straight.
Hey, look at that.
Now you only have 442 holes left.
Sweet.
442, one of my favorite holes on this. Piece of cake.
Do I need this?
Just doing a little supervising. Hope the mic doesn't pick that up. So you're looking at this.
Okay.
You feel it?
Mm-hmm.
So you just kind of find that sweet spot in there. Carefully, because you can bend the reamer and we don't want that. Okay, let's pull it towards you. Okay. All right, so this is where it's a lot of fun because Heather packs a lot of these parts and she discusses a lot of these parts, but now she gets to see where these parts actually go. So, come on in, babe. We're gonna ream a few more holes down here. So these two here are where our control column slide block will actually get installed. So go ahead and just drive through those. Okay, good. In the case of the tabs, we can actually go through and, because they're so thin and we're going through one at a time, these are real easy to just drill through and just push that reamer through versus what we discussed earlier as far as drawing it through. When you're drawing it, you really want to pay attention to the length of the bushing or the length of the area that you're going to be reaming. So in this case back here on our 90-degree bell crank that we're going to be using to connect our aileron push-pull tubes to our control column, we're actually going to have to come from the bottom because of the seat tab location. There's just no way to get the drill in there to pull that through. So if you want to come in from the bottom and just push that up and then make sure you're aligned when you go into that second tab so we don't open anything up. Okay, and then just pull it back out. All right, and then over here we've got 4 more tabs where our control column end block is actually going to be installed. It's aluminum block and a angle that is actually bolted down. So I'll take that and I'll hit those real quick. We're going to come back now to our socketed one. We're going to have to hit this one, which is just a real challenge sometimes. This is where having the universal joint, one way or another, welded on there or tabbed on there. And that way we can get to this guy. And getting this alignment with the bushing. Let me explain. So this is actually where our flap handle pivot point is, and the flap handle will come up here through our center console, but it's going to ride between this bushing and this tab. And so we want to make sure that this is aligned. Be really careful when drilling, because this bushing here is so long, you can sometimes warble out this hole. So you got to be really careful. If you feel like it's getting away from you, try coming in from the other side. So I don't like that. So we'll come in from the pilot side of the airplane. Okay, that's the right answer. So as this passed through, it lined up with this tab over here. I had already reamed it, so it just fell into place. But you could always ream from that side and just go through both of them, then you know they line up. So that about does it for the reaming. So let's rock and roll. We'll keep working on the horizontal elevator. We'll get some ribs in, get some ribs varnished, and keep this thing moving. So we'll see you on the next one.
You feel alive, let's hit the dance floor. Don't work too hard, my break a backbone. Return of the Mac, the king is back though. Corvette and cash, I never like those. She saw the stone, you know how that goes.